Hey there! Did you know Kroger always gives you savings and rewards on top of our lower-than-low prices? And when you download the Kroger app, you'll enjoy over $500 in savings every week with digital coupons. And don't forget fuel points to help you save up to $1 per gallon at the pump. Want to save even more? With a Boost membership, you'll get double fuel points and free delivery. So shop and save big at Kroger today. Kroger, fresh for everyone. Savings may vary by state. Restrictions apply. See site for details.
Hello, and thank you for listening to The History of World War II podcast, episode 463, Attrition, a game the entire country can play. Last time, in mid-August 1941, while the rest of Army Group South was pushing east, winning more than losing, the Romanians and Germans were struggling to take Odessa, the Black Sea port city. Though the Axis launched wave after wave, through grit and at times personal sacrifice, the attackers were kept at bay. Then again, they weren't done attacking. Nor were the Soviets done defending. And what transpired next was simply a contest of wills, and normally those fighting for hearth and home are willing and thus able to endure more. The next day, August 16th, just east of the two estuaries that are due north of Odessa, the invaders broke through, specifically infantry supported by tanks. This was in the Shitsley area, but that was irrelevant, as Colonel Osipov and his 1st Regiment of Naval Infantry were ready. The colonel and his men had already mixed it up with the invaders and had prevailed. But today was a new day. The Romanian troops and tanks pushed back the first barrier and believed momentum was on their side. But then the naval infantry, backed by border guards, rushed at this latest threat. But instead of simply engaging them, the Soviet units surrounded the enemy. This in itself brought the Romanians up short. They expected a straightforward fight, meaning if they won this engagement, well, they could just continue on. But that's not what had just happened. Now they were surrounded on all sides, so the question to them was, do we dare push further into enemy territory? Do we fight our way out? Or do we sit tight, knowing we have created a bridgehead? Fortunately, or not, that decision was taken out of their hands. The naval infantry and border guards all rushed in at the same time, not allowing the Romanians to focus solely on one section. Within a short time, the men of the Romanian bridgehead were either dead or captured. It literally no longer existed. Meanwhile, the defenders also captured 18 guns, 3 tanks, and 1 armored car to go along with their 200 surviving prisoners. But there would be other moments of desperate heroism on the battlefield. The 412th Coastal Battery was told of an enemy battery of heavy artillery setting up in the Biliaria area. This is to the east of where Colonel Osipov and his naval infantry carried out their latest victory. Clearly, the idea was to set up these large guns in support of another attempt in that same area. For Odessa, this could not stand. The large Romanian guns were just offshore and thus spotted by a Soviet patrol that was east of Odessa. As the guns were setting up, the defenders had to react swiftly, or soon their comrades on the front lines would be obliterated. But what the Soviets needed were exacting coordinates. If they just started firing, then all of the enemy guns in that area might go off in reprisal. As the Soviets were currently winning, they did not want much to change. So a man from the 412th Coastal Battery volunteered to slip out of the fighting, go into no man's land, and report back where the shells needed to land. He did so, but as time was an issue, he did not sneak back before his comrades on the crew opened up. Either way, he got the information to them, and just 18 shells later, the soon-to-be online enemy battery was a smoldering wreck. The naval infantry would live to fight another day. Going back to the Shitsley area, the small towns around there changed hands on August 16th and 17th, in fact, several times. When the Soviets returned to the area, they saw the equivalent of 2 regiments of dead Romanian troops lying around. Point is, the fighting was staying away from Odessa. It stands to reason that, with so many bodies lying around with nothing to show for it, the attackers would shift the axis of their attack. And sure enough, later on August 16th, it looked as if Romanian forces were building up near Kagarlik, due west of Odessa, just in front of the outer perimeter. They wanted to drive south and end up on the southern coastline, just below the target city. If this could be achieved, then the entire western perimeter would be weakened and thus opened up to a large-scale offensive. But having seen what was coming, the Army reserves were tapped to make this latest problem go away. They were considered, if it should come to it, expendable, as this was outside the Odessa area, and win or lose, these men might not make it back. As the sun went down on August 16th, these men moved out. It was hoped that a night march would put them within striking distance before the sun rose, and they were seen. But as this was too important to put all their eggs in one basket, the defenders had another formation gather and follow upon the Army reservists. Yet they weren't going to help the first group with their objective. No, they were to position themselves just east of Kagarlik, again due west of Odessa, just to make sure, if the reservists lost, that the Romanians could not march directly on the city, and 2, if the reserves won, then they could help encircle and slaughter the enemy. If this technique was good enough for Berlin to surround and slaughter, then it was good enough for Moscow. And whether it was the night march, the audacity, or a combination of both, the building Romanian attack force was surrounded and cut to pieces. Clearly, Budapest and Berlin were getting frustrated. If they tried to attack Odessa anywhere along the coastline, then Soviet ships would bombard the would-be attackers. But advancing away from the coast didn't help much either. Thousands of attacking troops were dead, and the city and its people within were still defiant. The reason for noticing this buildup of Romanian troops to the west of Odessa was that there had been an even larger attack in this same area just days ago, and at the time, the Soviet troops on the spot would have to do. There was no more time to bring in more men. 2 days prior, August 15th, the Romanians had gathered 2 divisions and 70 tanks. When they moved out, they easily pushed aside the first resistance encountered. But then they ran into the 25th Rifle Division, which was actually missing 1 regiment. The Soviet division absorbed the blow, but instead of panicking and running away, they launched counterattacks time and again, anything to throw off the clearly planned attack. One of the earlier counterattacks was carried out by the 4th Rifle Company, and they were supported by the 31st Rifle Regiment's Mortar Company. But as these riflemen were one of the first to go in, and the Romanians were still relatively fresh and confident, soon this Soviet Rifle Company was themselves surrounded. Which is when Junior Lieutenant V.P. Simonek, in command of the Mortar Company, ordered his men to fire on the approaching Romanians. The attackers were not approaching the Mortar Company. No, they were heading for the soon-to-be overwhelmed Rifle Company, but Simonek was having none of that. Seeing his comrades pinned down by a few well-positioned machine gun nests, Simonek grabbed a mortar, moved a ways away, lined up his shots, and one by one decimated the larger threat to the riflemen. This took care of the machine guns, but the Romanian infantry was still approaching. It's not clear if Simonov ever saw an American Western movie, but what did he do next? He grabbed up 2 pistols, raised them, and his voice, telling his men, "Follow me." Then he ran at the Romanians closest to the trapped riflemen, firing all the while. His men followed and did the same. The Romanians, shocked, ran away, and the Rifle Company was saved. Simonov was awarded the highest honor of his country, Hero of the Soviet Union. Near this fighting, another rifle company of the Soviet 25th Rifle Division was attacked by a Romanian battalion, so approximately 750 Romanians against 150 Soviet defenders. The Romanians were near before even being noticed, so the riflemen had seconds to prepare, as did the battery protecting them. When the Romanians came in and pierced the defensive line, because of their numbers, they were able to swing wide on either side. But Junior Lieutenant K.T. Lisi and his artillerymen took advantage of this and blasted the flanks of their own comrades with canister rounds. When a canister is fired, it disintegrates, and what's inside, iron balls or lead pieces, start to flare out. Depending on the distance, when its contents hit a mass of soldiers, the damage is severe, widespread, and lethal. Just then, 2 tanks were spotted, obviously hoping to support the Romanian battalion. So the artillery crews quickly switched to armor-piercing shells, and focusing on accuracy, not their nerves or the screams of their comrades, the 2 tanks were quickly taken out. Beside the 2 smoldering tanks, at least 350 Romanian troops lay on the ground dead. Another local victory. A bit to the northeast of this fighting, so closer to being to the northwest of Odessa, one battery had to fire shells for 19 hours straight, as the Romanians kept coming, and in part their plan was to be fired upon, so the Romanian artillery could spy out the Soviet location and fire on them. But due to the moving of the guns constantly, the Soviet artillery teams not only stopped the infantry charge, but knocked out 12 heavy guns of the enemy. The battery's lieutenant was awarded the Order of Lenin. Not that everything went the Russians' way. Back on August 16th, in the Kagarlik area, the Romanians had figured out enough to take advantage of Odessa's defensive perimeter. Recalling the half-circle protractor turned down on the left corner description that was the Black Sea coastline here, Romanian troops came at this area from due north. Thus, they did not hit the line dead on, but rather at an angle, and if they penetrated the outer line, then the Russians further down this half-circle to the southwest from Odessa would be cut off from the city. The weakened 25th Rifle Division was the intended target, so when this was figured out, they fell back. Sure enough, the Romanians got through to the 25th Rifle, who were soon fighting just to stay within the defensive perimeter. This could not stand, so a shock group was thrown together, made up of the Reserve 1st Cavalry Division, the 136th Reserve Regiment, and 2 battalions of the 95th Rifle Division. The fact that this force was made up of so many reserve units shows how much Safronov was at the bottom of his barrel, though not yet scraping it. However it happened, probably a lack of cohesion and not enough artillery to assist, this shock group not only failed, but was decimated. The survivors amounted to about 25 men left in each company, and they had started out with just over 100. This did not bode well. Odessa had that fewer men in reserve now, and the enemy was still nearby. But it was on August 17th. Common sense, or reality, decided to take the day off. The incursion just covered, a clear Romanian local victory, boosted the morale of the attackers. So on the 17th, offensives were launched at both ends of Odessa's perimeter and at its center, with tanks leading the way. Maybe because of the loss of the day before, this much larger attack was staved off by the desperate Russians. Nothing in war has to make sense. That is a constant. By now, Bucharest was getting serious grief from Berlin, so on August 18th, 8 divisions, some infantry, some cavalry, hit the entire Odessa perimeter, though the main thrusts were to the north of Odessa, near the estuaries, and to the northwest of Odessa. Even worse, the fighting near Kagarlik was still going on. This was more than the defenders of Odessa had dealt with thus far. Just to the right of Kagarlik from the Romanian perspective, infantry advanced with tanks in front of them, 60 tanks in front of them. But there was a surprise in store for the Russian defenders. These tanks had flamethrowers mounted on them, but the Russians had a surprise of their own prepared. These fire-breathing tanks came on, but just before opening up, they had to drive across a relatively open area. Russian artillery took advantage of this and opened up first. The tanks took their hits, but kept coming, wanting to get in close enough to use their flamethrowers against those troublesome enemy infantry. Just as the tanks were about to let loose with their flames, hundreds of Russian soldiers, lying down in cuts in the ground, quickly stood up and threw Molotov cocktails. Some of these men were burned alive, but many of the leading tanks were also set aflame. But the hell the attackers were going through wasn't over quite yet. With the Romanian tanks not sure what to do, the Soviet anti-tank artillery battalion under Captain V.I. Bakarsky urged his teams on. Before the tanks got away, 25 more of them were ruined. One tank crew took out 4 tanks alone and was cheered by their comrades. And yet, there was still fresh hell waiting for the Romanians. With the Romanian tanks and infantry retreating, at least here, the Russians were inspired enough to go after them. For the 161st Rifle Regiment, the game was afoot. Even their staff members got caught up in this, grabbed their rifles, and started running at the backs of their enemy. Going beyond their territory, within hours, 1,200 Romanian troops were surrounded and slaughtered. There was no time for mercy. The leader of the battalion that did the most damage was a 22-year-old. He also was awarded the title Hero of the Soviet Union. But there was one more deadly indignation the retreating Romanians would have to endure. As the attack had been along a rail line, the Soviet armored train number 21 came down the track and found itself in the middle of this Romanian retreat. There was only one thing for it. The men and guns on the train were readied, and they shot what enemy troops came into view. Overall, this single action lasted for 15 hours. The Romanians were certainly expecting something different, but instead suffered another defeat with many of their men and much of their equipment now gone. Something had to give, something had to change. So Bucharest, not sure what to do, went back to forming an attack from the Black Sea. But as diligent as the Russian troops and artillery crews had been, their reconnaissance pilots were just as determined. The Romanian transports, when they came the next day, carrying loads of infantry coming right out of Odessa, were charging into another trap. Greetings, everyone, from Central Virginia. So let's see here. I hope you enjoyed the interview with Mr. Bell, because I enjoyed that a lot. The book is amazing. You really do learn a lot about how humans' brains works and all this. And so anyways, I certainly do encourage it. Check it out. It was a pleasure to read. So let's see here. I've got a couple of members. Sean Tomlinson from Horncastle, Lincolnshire in the UK. Sean, thank you very much. Let's see here. Paul Mislinski from Leesburg, Virginia. Paul, if I butchered the last name, you know I didn't mean it, because, we're neighbors. We're both in Virginia, so I apologize. As far as donations, let's see here. Alejandro Sosa from Uruguay sent a donation, and he was asking about the Churchill mug. Yes, I do have some of those. So if you're in the U.S., you can just go on the website and order a mug. If you're outside the U.S., just shoot me an email, WWII@gmail.com. Say, hey, this is my name. I live here. How much would it cost to ship the mug here? I tell you, you say yes or no, and we're off to the races. Or not. No pressure. Anyways. And lastly, but not leastly, I don't think that's a word, Christopher Matthews. He donated and became a member. So Christopher, you are my new best friend, and he is from Mena Creek, Queensland, Australia. So thank you very much, Christopher. And as you can tell, I mean, the Soviets are just giving everything they've got to stop this. But more importantly, if you zoom out, as we kind of touched on before we got to Odessa, it really is messing up the overall attack plan of Army Group South. So we'll just see how it goes. But we all know how this is going to end. But still, examples of their defiance, very inspiring. Obviously, today, things are very different. We're not going to touch that because that's politics. This is history. Take care, everyone.